Hi, everyone. I'm Carly.
And I'm Sophia.
And this is Away She Goes, a podcast from Her Adventures.
Each episode will help you feed your wanderlust with travel tips, stories, inspiration, and more. Away she goes.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Away She Goes. Today, Sophia and I are joined by a very special guest. We have Team Her Adventures member Jenny, who is going to talk to us about her experience sailing around the world. And we're also going to talk a little bit about how she brought her dog sailing with her as well. Hi, Jenny.
Hi.
So before we start, would you mind just filling in our listeners on some of the work you do for Her Adventures behind the scenes? Jenny, for everybody who doesn't know, is very involved with Team Her Adventures. She helps us out with writing, with website editing. I'm not going to steal your thunder, but a lot goes on behind the scenes that Jenny's a part of. So I'll let Jenny explain what she does for Her Adventures.
Yeah, that's a lot of it already. So yeah, I'm a website editor and also team coordinator, volunteer coordinator for Her Adventures, and I write a lot as well. And yeah, I think I became a member just before the pandemic hit, like literally 5 minutes before, and have been happily involved ever since. You know, we all had so much time, and it was a great time to be part of this team because we all supported each other so much, and it was really great.
All right. So I guess we'll start right at the beginning. So you have had a lot of experience sailing around the world. You have a lot of really interesting stories, some of which I've heard and some of which we're going to hear today. But I think we should start at the beginning of your sailing adventures. Can you tell us how you met your now husband?
Yeah, so I lived in Germany at the time, is where I was born, where I'm from, where I grew up. And I was in university, and I just never really knew what I wanted to do with my life. You know, some people just wake up one morning and they know they want to be a teacher or a scientist or, you know, any of these things. But I just never did. The only thing I always knew is that I wanted to have adventures. And this is a short story. My ex-boyfriend's mom called me one day, and she lived in the Caribbean at that time on St. Thomas in the U.S. Virgin Islands. And she said, "Hey, I need some help with my store, and I need to move, and my back is bad. And if I pay for your ticket, will you come help me?" And I was like, "Sure, right? A free trip to the Caribbean. Who wouldn't say yes?" So I flew over there. It's a pretty long trip from Germany, and the first night we went to a bar, and I was really tired, very jet lagged. The music was loud, and so I was just kind of quiet. And she started talking to the guy who sat next to her at the bar. And at some point, she turns around to me and she elbows me and she says, "Hey, this guy has a sailboat. We're going sailing with him." I'm like, "Okay, I guess." And so 2 days later, he's a fisherman. He runs one of the big trawlers up in Alaska, and he had just flown in to get to his sailboat, which was on Virgin Gorda in the British Virgin Islands. And he was just at this bar for one night because he had a layover there. And he said, "Okay, fine, you know, show up on Virgin Gorda on Thursday at the 1 p.m. ferry, and I'll pick you up." And he didn't think much of it because, you know, the plans you make in a Caribbean bar generally don't they don't come too much. However, if you make them with two Germans, he was quite surprised to see us on Thursday. And the plan had been to stay for 2 days, and Connie, my ex-boyfriend's mom, stayed for 5, and I stayed for a week, and we really hit it off, and we just sailed in the BVIs, which is not real life sailing, I have to say that. It's always windy, it's always flat, nobody gets seasick, it's gorgeous, it's the dream, right? It's not that
I would find a way to get seasick. I would get seasick. I would be.
If you think you get seasick on a cruise ship, then you would probably get seasick there too. But anyway, I get very sick too, and I didn't. So, you know, we had a great week. So then his dad flew in, and they continued on to Trinidad, and I went back to St. Thomas, and eventually went back to Germany to finish my studies at university. And we just, you know, stayed in touch a little bit over email, and I was going to finish in October, and I just had no plans whatsoever. And he said, "You know, if you don't have any plans, why don't you come sailing with me this winter?" And I said, "Okay." And that was the whole start of it.
I love that story.
That's just like out of a movie, basically.
It really is. I hope I meet my future spouse in such an interesting way.
I
Honestly.
mean, really, it was just like a bar conversation, not even my own bar conversation.
But that's the good part, because like I don't see myself finding anyone in a bar conversation because I don't talk to anyone. So it's way easier if other people do it for you.
I also think it's
Very
funny
true.
how your ex's mom was like the matchmaker.
Yes.
I just can't get over that.
We had already been separated for 5 years at that point. So
Okay.
we stayed friendly afterwards, and she was always very adventurous, and so was I, and she liked that about me. And I had previously visited her in Florida after the breakup, so you know, it was just like almost like a friendship.
Okay, so that's how you met TJ, but what about the wedding? How did you like how did it end up that you like traveled with him for longer and
Yeah, so we met again at the end of October. We met in Copenhagen, and we flew to Trinidad where the boat was, and we had hit it off really well. That week we spent together in March, but it wasn't like we were in a relationship. It was sort of like, am I ever going to see this person again? But yeah, so then we made this plan, and we were on the boat together, which is where I then had my first real sailing experience. And talk about getting seasick. Ay, ay, ay. Anyway, so we sailed from Trinidad to Colombia with some stops in, Curacao and Bonaire and Grenada, and we spent Christmas in Colombia, in Cartagena. And by that time, we were in a relationship, and we just kind of tried to figure out how we were going to do this, because he's American, I'm German. It's not like you can just move to America and see if this works out or not. I mean, I'm sure everybody's watched 90 Day Fiance, and you can get,
That's my
a
favorite
spousal
show.
visa and go for 90 days. But he had to go back to Alaska, so I wasn't even going to see him for 2.5 months. That wasn't really an option for us. So instead, we flew to Las Vegas, and we got married there, and it was just the two of us, and it was good. It wasn't like a big fancy wedding with friends and family and whatnot. And I'm always thinking that at some point we'll go back to Vegas and renew our vows, and have the Elvis impersonator and the big dress and whatnot. But it was good anyway. Yeah, and after that, it was a sealed deal, basically, that we were going to travel together. We had this conversation, because he said, look, I know I'm asking a lot of you. Yes, you're going to have great adventures. However, I also don't want you to have a career, because, when I'm gone, yeah, you could work. But then when he's home 24/7, and he doesn't have to work, for 2 or 3 months at a time. He said, if you work full time, I will just be miserable. And that was okay with me. And yeah, so that's when we started our adventure together.
So did he I actually don't know this now that I'm realizing. Did he already own the sailing vessel that you guys had used for the past, 15 or so years? Or did he have a boat and then you purchased the new boat? How did that all come about?
Yeah, so he had a boat at the time, and we owned this boat. Wait, we got married in 2007, and then so after the spring after our wedding, we sailed to Costa Rica from where we had the boat shipped up to the Seattle area, and we thought, okay, this is just going to be our base, and we'll live here on the boat. Um, and we made it through one winter, and winters, like, really, I mean, the Pacific Northwest doesn't get super cold winters typically, but it's still not the greatest thing to be on a boat in the winter time.
No, I can
And so
imagine.
that first winter, he said, "Oh, let's just go on a trip." And we flew to Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, for a few days. And when we were there, he said, "Isn't this nice? We could live here if we wanted to." And so we sailed down there, and we spent 4 years down there. And then it was 2013 is when we sold the boat we had then and bought Rocket Science.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure. I love this. I love my job, but as I sit here, I'm like, I would love to just
Up
like,
and
let's go on an
leave.
adventure. Okay, cool. Like I would.
Amen.
And you know,
So
it's great. It has its advantages, and it has also a lot of disadvantages. Like I never saw myself as not working at all.
mm,
Um, so that was it weighed on me in a way. I did work in Mexico for a couple of years, but it's just not the same as having a regular career. While I wouldn't want, just to have 2 weeks of vacation a year, it's still, and it's not just about making money because TJ made enough money that he could support us and the
mm,
lifestyle, but about having something that really fulfills you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, with all that you learned in university, you probably didn't learn to sail, I guess.
Nope, nope. Inland Germany doesn't have a lot of opportunities there.
Yeah, I
Even
know.
though when I was, I think 12, we went on a trip with my school and we sailed on a lake there and it was very funny because it was these tiny boats and our teacher said, just give me all your cameras because you'll all probably fall in the water. And then she was the only one who ended up in the water. But yeah, that was my only sailing experience until that point.
Did you ever take any courses, or did TJ just teach you everything he knew and now you're a proficient sailor?
I did not take any classes. I think I probably should have, because if you sail on a small boat, you really learn how the boat reacts, because on a bigger, heavier boat, it's just not that obvious or it's much slower. But yeah, TJ is a good teacher, so he taught me everything I know.
What are some things that, because I never have, I mean, I've been on boats, but I've never been the captain of a boat. I've never sailed. Like what are some things that like living on the boat that I may not think of, because I live in an apartment. Like what are some adjustments, I guess is how I'm trying to word this. Like what were some adjustments that you had to make going from living on land and being accustomed to living on land to sometimes living on the ship?
So I think there's two different parts to it. One, when you just live on the boat and you are somewhere in port. First of all, there's not a lot of room. So you really have to live minimalist. You don't buy anything you don't need. We would regularly go through our stuff, and the rule was if you haven't used it for a year, it's got to go. Because the other thing is too, it's not that you don't have the room, but you weigh down the boat and then it affects the performance of the boat. So it's bad in multiple ways, basically. The other thing is, for example, you don't have unlimited water. Okay, if you're at the dock, you do, but you fill up a water tank, which the size of that can vary greatly from boat to boat. But we had she's like 100 gallons of water, but I would always just fill a 50-gallon tank, and it was always empty when I was shampooing my hair. Every time, every single time.
Wow.
It's just, I don't know, Murphy's boat law or something. So, and you don't generally have a car. So depending on where you are, you have to walk to the grocery store, or you have to rely on public transportation. And if you're cruising in the US, that's not so easy because, well, you know how it is. There just
Yeah, public
isn't.
transportation here is not the
Yeah,
best. No.
exactly. And it also, the distances are much greater. So maybe you can walk to the store, but maybe it's 6 miles and then you have to walk 6 miles back with all your stuff. So you just end up renting cars a lot, I guess. Um, yeah, and then when you're sailing, it depends. So, you can do like a 1 day trip and it's just not that big of a deal. But we have done quite a few trips that were multiple days or even weeks. And I think the one thing that you really have to know is you will be uncomfortable. You will not be sleeping at regular times because someone always has to be awake. You'll probably not get a hot meal if the weather is bad and it's just too rough to cook. You will definitely have to lower your hygienic standards because if it's really rough out, you're not showering, or, if you're on a multiple day trip or week trip, you have to really watch your water consumption, even if you have a water maker, because the water maker, it uses electricity, and you also have limited electricity. So basically everything is limited, and you're basically cut off from the outside world, which, that can be good or bad. We did all our trips until 2016 without any communication devices.
Wow.
So we would just say, okay, we will probably be there, say, on the 16th. But if we're not there on the 16th, please don't alert the Coast Guard, because you just don't know on a boat, right? You can make plans, but you are, if the wind's not great or anything comes up or something breaks, you could be delayed. So yeah, in 2016, we got like a satellite communication on the boat. But even that, it's super, super expensive. I think it was, maybe something like $10 a megabyte. So
Oh my God. That's
no,
so much.
There's no surfing or no browsing or anything like that. Just use it for to get weather reports or email. And so every few days I would send an email home just saying, hey, everything's great. And basically that was it. So yeah, you just, and even when you're in port, the marinas usually have Wi-Fi, and it's usually shared by tens or hundreds of people. So you can imagine how great your internet is.
Yeah, that all sounds a lot like camping, but on sea.
Exactly.
Camping on the water.
So do you have any, like, what makes it all worth it? Like, can you tell us some of your favorite stories that you have experienced while sailing?
Yeah, so first of all, the sailing community itself is just amazing. So because TJ is gone for months at a time, I have spent months by myself in different countries, in different ports, with brand new people every time. And, things go wrong just like they do in the house. And anytime I needed help, I would get it. It's a very supportive community, and because you have something so big in common, which is the sailing and the cruising, it's really easy to make friends too. And I have made some amazing friends over the years that I am still in touch with, which is one of the reasons I just love social media, because otherwise I would probably never hear from these people again. And I've for example, we met like a really nice family in Port Canaveral, Florida. And then when we were over in Europe, they said, hey, well, we're spending the summer in France. So do you want to come join us? So we tied the boat up in Spain and rented a car and met them in France. And it's so cool, So the people are just generally amazing. And the other thing is too, that you travel in a way that really allows you to immerse yourself in the place you're at. Because most of the places we've stayed, it's not just tourists, right? It's not just cruisers on their boats. There's always locals or expats that have lived there for 20 years. And, rather than staying in a hotel and just interacting with tourists and people who work in tourism, you're just living with the locals basically. And they can tell you where to go and what to see. And I always felt like I really learned what these countries are like, rather than, just going to Paris and seeing the Eiffel Tower, if that makes sense. And the other thing is too, that sailing it gives you a great chance for personal growth. It sounds weird, but especially when we do longer trips, like I said, it is uncomfortable, and you can't sleep when you want to sleep, and you have to push through the discomfort, especially because a lot of the time it was just the two of us. And if I didn't want to be awake at 2 a.m, well, I still had to be, because TJ was tired and he needed his sleep. And it is literally a matter of life or death to push through your discomfort and stay awake. If I was seasick, well, I just have to hang myself over the side and puke. But I still had to be there and do what needed to be done. And I think in a way it led to me taking my needs not so seriously. It's like we live in this age where you can get anything you want at the push of a button. And I just don't know if that's really so great. I mean, it's convenient, but if you are suddenly in a situation where you don't have these conveniences, how do you even function, right? And so it's good to know that you can function when things are bad, or when there's an emergency, or when, things don't go the way you want them to go. So it's just, yeah, it's a great way to travel and to learn about yourself and to really learn about the places you visit. And yeah, I think that's basically it.
Do
That's so-
you? Oh, sorry, Sophia.
No, I just wanted to say that sounds really wonderful.
I know I want
I
to buy
really
a
like that
sailboat
one.
now.
Yeah. I'll chip
Anybody
in on
want to
that.
go in three
Yeah.
ways on a sailboat and just start? Okay, let's do it. Let's do it.
And sail to Tuvalu.
Yes.
Well, we're still
Oh,
planning one big sailing trip after TJ retires, so we'll be in that area.
oh, okay. We'll talk about that. The last question that we have is what's next. So
Yeah.
save that for the very end because I want to hear about it.
Okay.
So we're going to take a little bit of a detour here. Listeners, stay tuned because at some point soon we're going to have an episode about traveling with dogs. But Jenny is very well known in Team Her Adventures for traveling with her dogs. So Jenny will be featured in that episode as well. But we're going to take a short little side trip here also to talk about sailing with a dog just quickly. So you had a dog, Baxter. Can you tell us how and when he came into the mix and just a little bit about sailing with a dog? And we have a very important question about how he used the bathroom on the boat. And I'm very curious about it.
Yeah, so after we had the boat up, well, we shipped the boat up to Seattle, and then we were there, I think, for about a month. And I was very unhappy because I've always had pets, and I just love animals, and I don't feel like a complete person if I don't have a pet. And so about a month in, we adopted a 2-year-old Beagle Jack Russell mix named Baxter. And he moved onto the boat with us. And it was a bit of an adjustment for him. He was afraid of noises he didn't know from the engine or from water pumps or whatnot. But, after a little adjustment period, he got pretty used to it.
Where did he go potty? I need to know. I didn't think about it until I saw that Sophia had added this to our sheet for this episode, and now I've just been fixating on it for the past hour. I need to know where he went potty.
Yes, so here's the theory. In theory, you get a piece of fake grass,
Okay.
and you put it somewhere convenient where in one spot, so he can get used to going in one spot. So you might not want to put it on the foredeck because if you're on the way, that's not a safe place for the dog to be. So then the training part, that was a little harder. And I think if you get a puppy and train them right away when they're young, it might be easier. Or if you don't get a Beagle Jack Russell mix, who are extremely stubborn, that might be helpful. But so basically we tried everything and he just wouldn't go. And so we did for the first until we actually left, we just did, short trips. We sailed around Vancouver Island one year in 2008, and where we would go to shore. He would go in the morning before we left, and then in the afternoon when we arrived, he could go to shore again and do his business. But then when we really left, and occasionally when he couldn't see land, he would actually use his potty pad. And when we finally left, we did hops down to California, and that was all fine with him. And then when we left San Francisco, it was going to be a longer trip all the way to Cabo San Lucas, which took us 9 days. And the weather was pretty bad in the beginning, and he just wouldn't go. And I was getting super concerned. And it's not like you can just pull over and let the dog go do his business, right? And finally, I didn't know what to do. We he just wouldn't go. And finally, one night he was in bed with me and he woke up and we had a little bullseye that went into the cockpit and I just stuck him through there and he peed for like, I don't know, 3 minutes or so. And that was sort of his breakthrough. After that, it was okay. If he could see land, it was of the opinion that we should just take him for a walk rather than him going on his mat. But yeah, when he got older and we had the new boat, we had a big flat open stern. That's the back of the boat. And we always had a mat there. And then sometimes when we were in port, he would even just go there rather than going for a walk. So he got over it at some point. The transition was hard. And I know other people who have said the same thing, that it's a hard transition. So if I would ever do this again, I would definitely get the boat and then get a puppy and then train him right away.
I feel better now that I know the answer to how he went to the bathroom. So if anybody wants to hear more about traveling with dogs, like I said, we are going to do another episode where Jenny will make an appearance. Sophia's going to talk about traveling with her dog, and some other members of Team Her Adventures are going to discuss traveling with their dogs as well. So if you want to hear more about that, stay tuned. In the next several weeks, we'll have another episode about that. But in the meantime, we're going to go back to sailing. So Jenny, I'm sure that we could, and I would sit here all day talking about sailing and talking about some of your stories and the things you've seen. This is a hard question. Do you have a favorite story? Do you have a story that sticks out that you want to share with our listeners about any time that you were sailing?
Yeah, I do. And it's a story about traveling when you have two different nationalities, the amazing people who are sailors, and just the difficulties you run into sometimes. So when we lived in the US, I had a green card, and then we sailed to Mexico, and the idea was that we would just spend half the year there and half the year in the States, and it just didn't pan out that way. So I surrendered my green card, and I was then on an ESTA visa, so just like a regular tourist visa. And we sailed, and we were in Panama, and we spent some time in the remote San Blas Islands there. And then right before we left to go back to Florida, someone told us that you cannot actually sail into the US on an ESTA visa because it is a tourist visa. You have to come in on an official carrier, like a plane or a train or a bus or something like that, but you cannot come in on a private vessel. So we were like, uh-oh, what are we going to do now? And we said, okay, we'll go to the Bahamas, which in itself sounds like easy enough, right? However, our boat, the keel on our boat was really deep. There was a 10-foot draft, sorry. And the Bahamas are really shallow. So we called up Bimini, and the marina there said, no, the channel is fine. It's 12 feet all through the channel, and you can come in. So we sailed north and got to Bimini on a Saturday night after 6.5 days of sailing, just ready to be there, just put our feet up and relax and have a good night's sleep. And it looked pretty shallow, and we were just on approach kind of looking at each other like, is this going to be okay? Well, it was not. So we ran aground pretty hard. And there's a saying in the sailing world, there's those that have run aground and those who will run aground.
I like that.
So we sat there for a while, stuck until a nice person in a big sports fishing boat came over and threw us a line and pulled us off. And we anchored out with the ships, and the anchorage was bad. It was really exposed, and there was a bad blow coming on Monday. And so we just had to get out of there. Well, the next day was Sunday, so we didn't even know if we could check into the country because, if just like any other way of travel, if you get to a new country, you have to check in. And so we were really stressed out. And TJ started calling Customs and Immigration in Florida to find out what would happen if I would come in with my ESTA visa on the boat anyway. And he probably talked to 10 different people and got 10 different answers. It was just ridiculous. So we decided to sleep on it and just wait to see what's going to happen the next day. So we went ashore on Sunday morning, and we could actually check in because it's a pretty big destination for people coming from Florida. And so they do have Customs and Immigration open on Sunday. We checked in, TJ checked out and left. And my plan was to take a plane to Fort Lauderdale, where he was heading. And it's not far. It's like maybe a half-hour plane ride. So I looked up tickets, and it was $400. I thought, no, screw
half an hour?
that. No, yeah, it's ridiculous, right?
Jeez.
So I thought, okay, screw this. I'm going to take the ferry to Miami instead. There was no ferry to Fort Lauderdale. And so I bought my ticket. It was maybe 10 in the morning, and boarding wasn't until 1, and the ferry wouldn't even leave until, I don't know, later that afternoon. So it was 1 o'clock. I went to boarding, and I just sat there and waited. And next to me sat this girl wearing a baseball cap that said West Marine on it. And if you're not a boater, West Marine is like the biggest marine supply store in the States. Well, I think it's the biggest anyway. It's everywhere. It's a big chain. And so we started talking, and it turned out she and her husband owned a charter business in Miami. And she really wanted to do what we were doing, to go cruising. And her husband was sort of reluctant. So she really was interested in talking to me. And we went on the ferry together, and they bought me lunch, and we just had a great day, just hanging out and chatting. And so we were finally approaching Miami, and they said, well, I said, I'm going to have to go get a rental car because I still have to get to Fort Lauderdale somehow. And they said, okay, well, we have a car here, so we'll wait for you to get through customs and immigration, then we'll take you to the rental car place, which is like super amazing, right? It's like I'm some sort of stranger that they've never met before, and just out of the goodness of their heart, in the middle of the night, they want to drive me to a rental car place, which, that made me really happy. So anyway, we got there, and there were hundreds of people on the ferry, and there were 3 immigration officers. So you can imagine how long it took. And it was almost my turn, and the officer was giving the guy in front of me a hard time, and I thought, oh, shit. Now what's going to happen? And so it was my turn, and he checked my passport, and he said, well, you don't have an exit stamp from the last time you left the U.S. I said, well, you don't get an exit stamp. And he was already mad at me because I had actually, we left by boat from San Diego, and I had done all the research. I had called USCIS in San Diego, and they said, no, just leave. So he was already kind of angry. And he said, well, where have you been since? And I said, Costa Rica, Panama, Mexico. And his eyes got wide, and he said, why? Thinking, I don't know, what if I'm kind of a drug dealer? And I said, because I live on a sailboat. And he said, oh, and your husband is a fisherman. And I said, how the hell do you know that? He said, oh, I talked to him on the phone yesterday.
What?
I know, right? I could not believe that happened. I mean, what are the odds? I mean, there must be thousands of immigration officers in Florida. And this one person that TJ talked to on the phone was actually one checking me. And he said, you're really lucky, because I was ready to take you to the other room and give you a hard time. And I was like, oh gosh. So I finally got out, and I was shaking. I was close to having a nervous breakdown. And here is this lovely couple waiting for me. And I tell them what happened. I said, it's all right. Come on. We'll take you to the rental car place now. And then you can just go to Fort Lauderdale, and it will be fine. And it was 11 p.m. at that time. We get to the rental car place. Of course, it's closed, right? So they started calling up all the rental car places, and literally all of them were closed except the one at the airport. And I said, look, you guys have been great. You've helped me out so much. I can just get a cab and go to the airport and take it from there. And the guy said, you know what? This is not acceptable to me. If this was us, would you just leave us stranded here? So no, we're driving you to Fort Lauderdale now. So like 11 p.m., they drove me all the way to Fort Lauderdale, a stranger, right? Like, just because I was a sailor and they were sailors, and in the sailing community, we have to stick together. And this is just really my favorite story that I tell all the time, because it's not just an example for how amazing this community is, but it also, every time I feel a little down, it restores my faith in humanity a lot.
It really does show the kindness of strangers.
That's such a good story.
Yeah, that's the best.
Yes. So what is the longest stretch that you've, or the longest sailing trip? I don't know. What is the word even for that?
Passage.
The longest passage you've had. Thank you.
Yeah, it was 16 days when we crossed the Atlantic the second time. we sailed from La Palma in the Canary Islands to Antigua in the Caribbean, and we probably could have made it a little faster. We had some crew that were really afraid of going fast and didn't want to do any work, which crew is a whole different topic. But anyway, so it took us 16 days. It was really long. It wasn't the most trying passage, but it was definitely the longest. And I was very happy when it was over. And we got there on Christmas Eve, so just in time to celebrate a little bit.
That's nice. To me, 16 days to cross the Atlantic sounds very little. But to be fair,
Yeah.
I've only just finished reading a boat where someone rode the Atlantic. So that takes a whole lot longer, I guess.
Yeah, I have read a couple of those. They're actually great books. But yeah, our boat was very fast. So while 16 days seemed really slow for us, it was actually quite fast. The other Atlantic crossing we did took us, and yes, I did time it. It was 8 days, 18 hours and 48 minutes.
Wow.
But that was from Newfoundland to Ireland, and it was very rough, and it was always windy except for one day, and that was yeah, I would not want to repeat that one.
So I have a question. You've been so many places, and I'm very jealous. Is there anywhere on your bucket list and TJ's bucket list that you guys haven't visited yet that maybe you're thinking about taking a trip to soon?
Well, we sold the boat, so sailing trips are probably not going to happen again until
No.
TJ retires, and we have time to do a South Pacific loop, which is when we would probably hit Tuvalu too, and then you should really join us, Carly.
I would love to go with you. Don't joke with me because I will. I will show up suitcase ready to go. I'm ready.
All right, yeah, I'm counting on it. It will
Okay.
still be a while, so
Listen, that's okay. If you're going to Tuvalu, I would be happy to hitch a ride.
So for land travel, we have done some camping with Baxter. He sadly passed away in March last year. He was really old, so it was time. And that's also one of the reasons we stopped sailing. He just got so old that he couldn't manage on the boat anymore, so we had to buy him a house. But yeah, and then we did like a lot of road trips with him and camping and whatnot, and it was fun. And after we stopped sailing, I was a little bit burned out on destinations. I was like, I just want to go home and never go anywhere ever again. It's worn off. The pandemic certainly helped.
Yeah.
Not being able to go anywhere at all. But yeah, I think that probably in December we're going to go to Patagonia and do some hiking there. That's big on both our bucket lists. I want to go to Vietnam. So Carly, you're on the hook for that for 25.
Let's do it. Let's go.
I really, one of my big bucket list items, probably the number one bucket list item, but I probably have to get in better shape to do this, is to hike to Everest Base Camp. That would be super amazing. Yeah, I don't know. It's like I do so much writing for the Her Adventures website, and I'll do some research and I'll be like, oh my God, that sounds amazing. I just have to go to this place. So, my bucket list is always growing, changing. It's always in motion.
A few weeks ago, Jenny and I met in person for the first time, and we had dinner, and Jenny had just written an article about backpacking through Southeast Asia. Go check it out if you haven't yet. And that was when Jenny proposed this Vietnam idea to me, because I'm talking about a trip to Thailand and Singapore next summer. And we were talking about that. And over dinner, Jenny and I started talking about Vietnam and how it would be so cool to go. And so now we have this very ambiguous, vague plan, but we're going to Vietnam. So it's happening.
I'm counting on it because TJ doesn't want to go. So
well, I'll go. I want to go. You guys know me. I want to go everywhere. So you name a place and a time and I'll be there.
But yeah, probably, Nepal. I haven't gone to China yet either. I would really love to do some more traveling in Asia. I've been to India and I've been to Japan, but that's the extent of it. There's just so many cool places out there that you don't even think of until you start doing some research. And then it's like, wow, I can't believe I haven't even been there yet.
Yep, just like the last episode we had where Carly educated me on Costa Rica. Nope, Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico. I always get them mixed up.
That's okay. I still think it was funny that right after that episode, I had like a surprise, unexpected trip. Literally, like a week after we recorded that
Yes.
episode, I had like a surprise, unexpected trip to Puerto Rico also.
It was meant to be.
It was meant to be.
So before we end this episode, do you have any last advice for our listeners? Maybe if they want to go into sailing, like what are places to start even? Like I would just be at a loss. Like,
Yeah, I wouldn't even know where to begin.
Yeah, if you've never been on a boat, I say look for a crew position. And there's lots of lots, I should say. There are websites like Crew Finder, and there's another one, I can't recall it right now, but you can find it on the internet anyway. The people looking for crew, I would recommend first doing like a short trip. For example, first time we went through the Panama Canal, we took a Swedish girl who was backpacking South America, and she just needed a ride or wanted a ride because, going through the Panama Canal is on the bucket list of many people for some unfathomable reason because it's not fun. It's a long, stressful day. Anyway, but yeah, so, there was just, I think she was with us for maybe 3 days or so. So she didn't get like a real sailing experience, but just being on a boat and handling lines and, all these things that you have to do. But yeah, look for a crew position and don't go for the Atlantic crossing right away, because once you're off, you're stuck and they're not going to turn around for you, and this could be very bad. So, and what I would say for that is, you really need to do your research. If you are in the same area and get to meet the captain, like really find out what is his experience, who is this person, what is his personality, who else is coming, what are their personalities, because personality is a really big deal. Like you're going to be stuck in a very small space together for a long time, and you're going to find out who these other people are very quickly if they're not who they seem to be. Sounds ominous, but it is a fact, unfortunately. And ask a lot of questions. Ask about the boat. How old is the boat? What's the maintenance record on the boat? What shape is it in? All these kind of things. Like what's the and one big thing is make sure they're not drinking on passage. I know a lot of people do. I don't think that's acceptable. It's like drinking and driving, basically, right? So that's a big safety aspect. I actually wrote an article for the website about things you should look out for and what to expect when you cross the Atlantic. So we can maybe link this with the episode.
Definitely.
But yeah, so if you want to get into boating, I think crewing for someone is a good start, just so you get an idea of what is this actually like. And if you want to do this on your own, I mean, I could probably talk about this for 3 hours. One thing I can recommend, there's a YouTube channel that is really amazing. It's a young couple that took the plunge and bought their first boat, and they did it on a budget and did everything themselves. And they don't make it look like it's all, sunsets and margaritas. They give a pretty good insight on what it is actually like, because it can be quite miserable. While there are amazing moments, you're sitting on the bow and the weather is balmy and there's a beautiful sunset and there's dolphins playing at your feet. I mean, it happens, but there are other moments that are not that much fun. So the channel is called Sailing Kitty Wake. And if you want to just start out and get to know basically all the basics, what you need to know about buying a boat and how to budget and the skills you need to have, I think that's a really good starting point.
That sounds like some really good advice. Thank you
Oh
very
yeah,
much
and
for
also
that.
we actually took them along for a trip once. So if you check out that channel, you can see TJ and me and Rocket Science and Baxter in action.
I'm going to go. That's what I'm doing this afternoon. I'm going to go on YouTube.
Nice. Do you have
Sophia,
any? Yeah, I was gonna say like last words for listeners. If they if you want to give a shout out to any places they can find you or something like that, you're free to do that.
Yeah, we have a blog. It's svrocketscience.com. We're probably going to take it down sometime next year because we sold the boat and the new owners would like to take it over. But that's where we have documented all our adventures. You can find me on Instagram, where admittedly you will probably mostly see pictures of my dogs.
Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that at all.
At jenny.durnan. Yeah, but the blog is basically where you can read all about our adventures.
That's all for this episode. If you'd like more Away She Goes in your life, make sure to stop by heradventures.com/podcast. That's where you can fill out a form if you're interested in being a guest on the show. And you can also write to us at awayshegosgwt@gmail.com or leave us a message on our Google voicemail from any phone or computer at 1-563-503-6323. To follow our adventures, you can follow me on Instagram at Carly Sees the World. Carly is spelled Carli.
You can also follow me at Sophia AEZ. Sophia is spelled Sophia. Away She Goes is part of Her Adventures, a community dedicated to radically redefining travel to be inclusive, sustainable, and empowering. You can learn more about Her Adventures, find travel tips and support, shop travel-themed items made by our members, and join our Facebook group with nearly 100,000 women all around the world. All at heradventures.com. We can't wait to connect and explore with you. Away she goes.